Picture this. You're 19 years old, standing in the back of a church, watching your father marry the woman who destroyed your family. The woman who convinced him to abandon you and your siblings when you needed him most. The woman who now gets to wear white and pretend she's some kind of innocent bride. Well, that was me 6 months ago, and let me tell you something. I wasn't just there to throw rice and fake a smile. My name is Sarah, and today I'm going to tell you the story of how my father's second wedding became the perfect stage for the most satisfying revenge of my life. We're talking about public humiliation, family secrets exposed, and a bride who thought she could manipulate her way into a fairy tale ending. Spoiler alert, she was dead wrong. You're going to hear about the 2 years of planning that went into this moment, the evidence I collected, and the exact moment I stood up during the ceremony and changed everything forever. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about justice. It's about standing up for yourself when everyone else has given up on you. And it's about making sure that people who think they can walk all over you learn that actions have consequences. So grab your popcorn, hit that like button if you're ready for some serious family drama, and buckle up because this story has more twists than a soap opera. Trust me, by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why sometimes revenge isn't just satisfying, it's necessary. Let me take you back to where this all started, because you need to understand the level of betrayal we're dealing with here. 3 years ago, my family was far from perfect, but we were together. My parents had been married for 22 years, and yeah, they had their problems like any couple, but nothing that seemed insurmountable. My mom worked as a nurse, pulling double shifts to help pay for my college tuition and my younger brother's medical expenses. He has cerebral palsy and requires constant care. Then enter Miranda, stage left, like some kind of home-wrecking hurricane disguised as a concerned family friend. She was my mom's co-worker at the hospital, someone who had been to our house for barbecues, who had sat at our dinner table, who had looked my mother in the eye and called her a friend. But behind those fake smiles and sympathetic hugs, she was systematically destroying everything my family had built. It started small, the way these things always do. Miranda would text my dad about work stuff that somehow always required late-night conversations. She'd show up at our house when my mom wasn't home, claiming she needed to drop off something for work. She'd make comments about how stressed my mom looked, how maybe she was working too hard, how she didn't seem to appreciate everything my dad did for the family. Classic manipulation tactics, and my father fell for every single one. The worst part wasn't even the affair itself, though finding those text messages on my dad's phone was like getting punched in the gut. The worst part was watching him change. This man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had stayed up all night helping me with science projects, who had promised to walk me down the aisle someday, suddenly became this stranger who looked at our family like we were burdens he couldn't wait to escape. When my parents finally divorced, Miranda made sure she was right there to comfort my poor, misunderstood father. She painted herself as his savior, the woman who truly understood him, while my mother was left picking up the pieces of her shattered life and trying to figure out how to manage my brother's care on a single income. My dad moved in with Miranda within a month of the divorce being finalized, and suddenly we went from being his priority to being weekend obligations. But Miranda wasn't satisfied with just stealing my father. She wanted to erase us completely. She started poisoning him against us, telling him we were being manipulative when we asked for help with my brother's medical bills. She convinced him that my mom was trying to use us kids to get more money from him. She made him believe that we resented his happiness and that the best thing he could do was create some distance until we could accept his new life. Distance turned into weeks without phone calls. Weeks turned into missed birthdays and canceled plans. My little brother, who idolized our dad, started asking why Daddy didn't want to see him anymore. Try explaining that to a kid with special needs. Try telling him it's not his fault when you're not even sure you believe it yourself. My mom started working even more hours to cover the expenses my dad had stopped helping with, and I watched her age 10 years in 6 months. The final straw came when my dad announced his engagement to Miranda after dating her for barely 8 months. 8 months after destroying a 22-year marriage, this woman thought she deserved a white dress and a celebration. The worst part was the guest list. Half the people invited were former friends of my parents, people who had watched my mom struggle, and now were expected to celebrate her replacement. That's when I knew I couldn't just sit back and let this happen. Miranda had spent 2 years orchestrating the destruction of my family, manipulating my father into abandoning his responsibilities, and now she wanted to be celebrated for it. She wanted her fairy tale wedding, where she got to play the blushing bride while my mom worked double shifts just to keep food on the table. Well, I decided it was time someone showed her that fairy tales don't always have happy endings. The planning started that very night. I wasn't going to just crash the wedding and make a scene. That would be too easy to dismiss as the emotional outburst of a resentful daughter. No, I was going to be methodical, strategic, and absolutely devastating. Miranda thought she was so clever, but she had no idea that while she was busy playing house with my father, I was building the case that would expose her for exactly what she was. You want to know what real revenge looks like? It's not throwing a drink in someone's face or keying their car. That's just petty drama that makes you look unstable. Real revenge is methodical, calculated, and absolutely undeniable. It's about gathering evidence, timing everything perfectly, and making sure that when you strike, there's no way for your target to wiggle out of the consequences. My first step was becoming the perfect daughter again. I started calling my dad regularly, being sweet and supportive about his relationship with Miranda. I complimented her cooking when I came over for awkward family dinners. I asked about wedding plans with genuine seeming enthusiasm. I even offered to help with the preparations, because nothing says, "I've accepted your new stepmother," like volunteering to address wedding invitations. But while I was playing the role of the reformed daughter, I was actually documenting everything. Every conversation where Miranda badmouthed my mom. Every time she made snide comments about my brother's condition. Every moment where she revealed her true colors when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I started recording our phone calls, perfectly legal in my state as long as one party consents, by the way, and keeping detailed notes of dates, times, and exactly what was said. The real gold mine came when I volunteered to help Miranda with her social media presence for the wedding. She wanted everything to be Instagram perfect, so I offered to help her organize photos and create those cute couple posts that would make all her friends jealous. What she didn't realize was that I was also getting access to years of her digital history, including messages and photos that told a very different story than the one she'd been selling to my father. Remember how I mentioned she'd been a family friend? Well, those old photos from barbecues and family gatherings suddenly looked very different when you knew what to look for. Miranda wasn't just being friendly in those pictures. She was studying my parents' relationship, looking for weaknesses, positioning herself as the understanding friend who was always there to listen. I found messages she'd sent to other people during that time, talking about how unhappy my dad seemed, how she thought she could make him happier. But the absolute smoking gun came when I discovered her previous marriage history. Turns out Miranda had a pattern. This wasn't her first rodeo when it came to breaking up families. Her first husband had left his wife for her under remarkably similar circumstances, and that marriage had lasted exactly 3 years before she'd moved on to her next target. My father wasn't her soulmate. He was just her latest project. I spent months building this case, creating a timeline of her manipulation, collecting screenshots and voice recordings, and organizing everything into an absolutely bulletproof presentation. But I wasn't planning to present it in a courtroom. I was planning to present it at her wedding, in front of everyone she wanted to impress. The beauty of my plan was in its simplicity. Miranda had insisted on having a traditional ceremony with all the classic elements, including the part where the officiant asks if anyone objects to the union. Most people think that's just a formality, something that never actually happens in real weddings. But I was about to prove them wrong. I practiced my speech hundreds of times, timing it perfectly to deliver maximum impact in minimum time. I knew I'd only have a few minutes before someone tried to stop me, so every word had to count. I prepared handouts with the most damning evidence, ready to distribute to key family members and friends. I even coordinated with my mom and brother, who would be watching the live stream from home. Yes, Miranda was the type to live stream her wedding, because of course she was. The final piece of the puzzle was my outfit. I needed to look respectful enough that people would take me seriously, but memorable enough that this moment would stick with everyone who witnessed it. I chose a dress that was elegant but not attention-grabbing, and I made sure my phone was fully charged and ready to record everything. Because if I was going to destroy someone's wedding, I was definitely going to have the receipts. As the wedding day approached, Miranda kept commenting on how happy she was that I'd finally accepted her, how wonderful it was that we were going to be a real family. My dad actually thanked me for being so mature about everything, for giving Miranda a chance despite our rocky start. If they only knew that their perfect wedding was about to become the most talked about family scandal in our town's history. The morning of the wedding, I woke up with a calm I hadn't felt in years. All the anger, all the resentment, all the sleepless nights planning this moment, it all crystallized into this perfect sense of purpose. Today was the day Miranda would finally face the consequences of her actions, and everyone who had enabled her manipulation would see her for what she really was. I arrived at the church early, blending in with the other guests, accepting compliments on how mature I'd become, how proud my father must be of me for embracing his new happiness. Miranda's friends kept telling me how lucky I was to have such a wonderful stepmother, how Miranda had told them she was so excited to be part of our family. If they only knew how short-lived that excitement was about to be. The ceremony itself was everything Miranda had dreamed of. Flowers everywhere, professional photography, a string quartet playing classical music while guests found their seats. She'd even hired a wedding planner to make sure every detail was perfect. The irony wasn't lost on me that she'd spent more on this wedding than my parents had ever been able to afford for their anniversary celebrations. When Miranda walked down the aisle in her $1,000 dress, looking radiant and triumphant, I felt a moment of something that might have been sympathy. She genuinely believed she'd won, that she'd successfully rewritten history and erased the damage she'd caused. She looked at my father with what seemed like real love, and for just a second, I wondered if I was making a mistake. But then I remembered my brother asking why Daddy didn't love him anymore. I remembered my mom crying in the bathroom because she couldn't afford his physical therapy anymore. I remembered all the lies Miranda had told, all the manipulation, all the pain she'd caused while pretending to be the victim. That moment of doubt vanished, replaced by steel-hard resolve. The officiant began the traditional ceremony, talking about love and commitment and the sacred bonds of marriage. He spoke about how marriage requires honesty, trust, and putting your family first, words that would have been laughable if they weren't so perfectly ironic. When he got to the part about speaking now, or forever holding your peace, the church fell into that expectant silence that usually lasts about 3 seconds before moving on to the vows. But I didn't let those 3 seconds pass. I stood up, and my voice carried clearly through the church when I said, "I object." The gasp that went through the congregation was audible, and I saw Miranda's face go white as she turned to stare at me. My father looked confused and embarrassed, probably thinking I was about to make some emotional plea about missing my mom or not wanting him to remarry. "I object," I continued, walking slowly toward the front of the church, "because this marriage is based on lies, manipulation, and a pattern of behavior that everyone in this room deserves to know about before they witness these vows." I pulled out my phone and the printed handouts I'd prepared, my hands steady despite my racing heart. "Miranda, you've told everyone here that you're a woman who fell in love with an unhappily married man and gave him the courage to start over. But what you haven't told them is that this is your pattern." I started distributing the evidence packets to the front rows, where Miranda's family and closest friends were sitting in shocked silence. "You haven't told them about your first marriage, which ended exactly the same way this relationship began. You haven't told them about the 2 years you spent systematically manipulating my father, alienating him from his children, and convincing him that his family was holding him back from happiness." My voice got stronger with each word, and I could see people opening the packets, their faces changing as they saw the evidence I'd compiled. The church erupted into chaos. Miranda was screaming denials. My father was trying to get people to sit down and stop looking at the evidence, and half the congregation was on their feet trying to see what was happening. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more bombshell to drop, and this one was going to make sure Miranda never showed her face in our town again. The aftermath of that wedding was everything I'd hoped for and more. Within hours, the story had spread through our entire community, because apparently dramatic wedding objections are the kind of gossip that travels faster than wildfire. But this wasn't just gossip. I had receipts, evidence, and a paper trail that no one could dispute. Miranda's carefully constructed image crumbled overnight. The evidence I'd presented showed not just her pattern of breaking up families, but also financial irregularities that raised serious questions about her motives. Turns out she'd been researching my father's assets long before she'd made her move, and her sudden interest in our family had coincided perfectly with my dad getting a promotion at work. My father was devastated, but not in the way you might expect. He wasn't angry at me for ruining his wedding. He was angry at himself for being so blind to what was happening. The evidence was so overwhelming that he couldn't deny it, couldn't rationalize it away, couldn't pretend that Miranda was just misunderstood. For the first time in 3 years, he saw her clearly. Within a week, Miranda had moved out of my father's house and out of our town entirely. She couldn't handle the shame of having her true nature exposed so publicly, and she definitely couldn't handle the fact that her manipulation tactics had been documented and shared with everyone who mattered in her social circle. My father found out later that she'd been telling people for months that his children would eventually come around once they realized how much happier he was with her. The best part of all this wasn't the public humiliation or even getting Miranda out of our lives. The best part was getting my father back. Without Miranda's constant poison in his ear, he started to see what he'd sacrificed for his relationship with her. He realized that his children hadn't been manipulating him. We'd been trying to maintain a relationship with a father who was pulling away from us. My father spent months making amends, not just with apologies, but with real changes in his behavior. He started contributing to my brother's medical expenses again. He began showing up for important events and actually being present instead of checking his phone for messages from Miranda. Most importantly, he acknowledged the pain he'd caused and took responsibility for his choices instead of blaming everyone else. My mom was gracious about the whole thing, which honestly made me respect her even more. She didn't gloat about being proven right, didn't demand dramatic gestures of apology, and didn't make my father grovel for forgiveness. She just quietly accepted his renewed commitment to co-parenting and moved forward with the dignity she'd maintained throughout the entire ordeal. People ask me if I regret what I did, if I think I went too far by exposing Miranda so publicly. My answer is always the same. I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret doing it. Sometimes people need to face consequences for their actions, and sometimes those consequences need to be public to prevent them from doing the same thing to other families. Miranda had spent 3 years destroying relationships, manipulating emotions, and convincing people that her victims were the real villains. She'd counted on everyone being too polite, too conflict-averse, or too afraid of causing drama to call her out on her behavior. Well, she counted wrong. The wedding that was supposed to be her triumph became her downfall, and honestly, I can't think of a more fitting end to her manipulation campaign. She'd used that church to celebrate stealing someone else's husband, so it seemed appropriate that the same space would be where her lies finally caught up with her.